You think you're doing the right thing? Stocking up, getting organized, and taking responsibility for your family's safety. You're not waiting for the system to save you. You're building independence. But here's the unsettling truth. Not every survival item you buy is treated the same. Some of them quietly push you onto what many call the Prepper Blacklist. In today's world, every purchase leaves a trace. From your power generator to your medical supplies, your buying habits paint a picture of how self-reliant you are, and that picture doesn't always sit well with those in charge. Governments and agencies claim to support preparedness, but only to a point. They want you capable enough to survive for 72 hours, not so prepared that you can function completely off the grid. Certain items like night vision gear, encrypted radios, large fuel tanks, and bulk medical kits are treated as potential threats, not just tools for survival. They're logged, tracked, and in some cases flagged for review. Why? Because these purchases signal independence, the very thing control systems are designed to limit. This isn't about paranoia, it's about awareness. When the next crisis hits, the people who control resources, fuel, food, and information will know exactly who has what. And in those moments, being too prepared might make you a target, not a survivor. Night vision and thermal gear. Eyes they don't want you to have. Let's be blunt. The ability to see in the dark is power. It's the difference between being a target and being invisible. And that's exactly why night vision and thermal optics are tightly controlled. Gear like the PVS-14 or advanced FLIR thermal scopes isn't just restricted, it's tracked. These devices fall under ITR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations, meaning you're treated almost like an arms dealer just for owning one. Sellers are required to record every transaction and often share buyer details with federal agencies. That alone should tell you how uncomfortable authorities are with civilians having this capability. Think about it when the lights go out, whether during a power grid failure, natural disaster, or civil unrest, whoever can see in the dark has the upper hand. Law enforcement, military units, and certain federal agencies don't want competition in that domain. They want to maintain total monopoly over nighttime operations. A regular citizen being able to move, observe, or defend effectively in the dark is viewed as a threat to public order. That's bureaucratic code for you're harder to control. Even worse, owning night vision gear automatically lands you on quiet watch lists. Some people have reported routine visits or calls after high-end optics purchases. It's all about maintaining dependency. They want you helpless when the lights go out, not capable. Because in darkness, information is survival. And if you can see when others can't, you're no longer a compliant citizen, you're a wild card. So while mainstream ads glorify high-tech tools, behind the scenes, agencies are busy monitoring who buys them. Night vision isn't just hardware, it's independence. And independence, in the eyes of the system, is dangerous. 2. Large-scale fuel storage independence. They can't tolerate. Fuel equals movement. Movement equals freedom. And freedom, especially during crisis, is the one thing the system can't allow. Keeping a few 5-gallon gas cans, that's fine. Everyone does that. But start storing fuel in 55-gallon drums or install a stationary tank, and suddenly you're a potential threat. That's when the fire marshal, local inspectors, and sometimes even Homeland Security start showing interest in your property. It's not about safety, it's about control. During any large-scale disruption, fuel shortage, cyber attack, war scare, fuel becomes the first rationed resource. Governments use scarcity to maintain order. The fewer people who can travel independently, the easier they are to manage. Stockpiling fuel breaks that system. It means you're not dependent on weekly station runs or government distribution plan. That's exactly why high-volume fuel storage raises red flags. Suppliers are often required to log large orders and report them to local authorities. Even if you're storing for backup generators, you're quietly being profiled. In a declared emergency, private fuel reserves can even be seized as critical infrastructure resources. Translation: they take your independence and label it national need. The narrative is always the same: hoarding endangers community stability. But what they really mean is that your ability to move freely, to power equipment, to keep your home warm without assistance, that undermines centralized control. Every time you fill another drum, you step further outside their dependency web. You're not supposed to be self-reliant. You're supposed to wait for trucks, rations, and emergency allocations. Fuel is freedom, Plain and simple. That's why the system wants to keep it on a leash. 3. Advanced medical independence. Healing without permission. You can own a first aid kit, no problem. That makes you responsible. But try ordering multiple trauma kits, antibiotics or surgical tools, and watch how quickly your name lands in data systems. That's because advanced medical independence terrifies the establishment. The entire healthcare framework thrives on dependency. Appointments, prescriptions, insurance codes, controlled distribution. When people start sourcing what they need directly, the control structure cracks. Patterns in online purchases. Fish antibiotics, sutures, IV kits, wound closure tools. Immediately trigger suspicion. You're not supposed to be able to treat infections, perform basic surgery, or manage trauma without permission from a licensed entity. Even though many rural or off-grid preppers learn these skills to survive, it's treated as subversive behavior. The unspoken rule is simple. If you can heal yourself, you don't need them. And if you don't need them, you're harder to manipulate. Authorities justify their tracking as public health safety. They claim untrained civilians could misuse medical supplies. But in reality, it's about limiting independence. Mass trauma supplies suggest preparation for collapse or conflict, scenarios they don't want citizens prepared for. That's why bulk orders get flagged and why certain medical tools are quietly reclassified as restricted. The message is clear. Patch up a scrape, fine. Suture a wound, suspicious. Build a stock of antibiotics, and you've crossed into territory that makes bureaucrats nervous. True medical readiness challenges their monopoly on survival. When disaster strikes, the people who can treat wounds, prevent infections, and stabilize trauma are the ones who'll last, and they won't need to line up at government shelters. That's the real 4 encrypted radios. The silent network. They don't want you talking on. Let's not sugarcoat it. Secure communications are power, and power makes authorities nervous. Encrypted radios and mill-grade comms don't just let you talk, they let you coordinate without a government eavesdropper listening in. That's the core reason those devices are treated like contraband in polite bureaucratic conversation. When everyone else's traffic is visible, whoever controls the canals of information controls the response. A civilian mesh of encrypted radios breaks that model. Suddenly there's a private channel the state can't shape, throttle, or exploit for crowd control. That's why buying high-end encrypted sets puts a target on your back. Vendors who sell commercial encryption-capable radios typically keep records, and importers of military-grade hardware operate under paperwork that can and will be checked. A few purchases, a pattern of replacements, or a single registration can easily flag an individual or group as having the capability to run independent operations. In a crisis, information flow becomes a weapon. Governments prioritize control of that weapon above almost everything else. The panic you see on the part of officials isn't abstract. It's tactical. If citizens have their own secure channels, they can organize evacuations, coordinate mutual aid, verify reports, and move resources without needing permission. That undermines staged narratives and centralized distribution plans. It also makes enforcement harder. How do you impose curfews or reroute aid when people are coordinating around you in channels you can't enter? The response is predictable. Audits, license requirements, seizures, and sometimes criminalization of unlicensed encryption. The rhetorical cover is always public safety and interference with lawful operations, but the practical effect is to keep the talking public and the listening public aligned and keep private networks from emerging. For the prepper, encrypted comms are a straightforward survival tool. For the system, they're a contagion of autonomy. That's why every step toward private encrypted communication raises alarms and invites scrutiny, even if all you want is a reliable way to check on neighbors or coordinate a community generator swap when the grid goes down. 5. Industrial-scale water purification, clean water, they want in their vaults. Water is the most basic kind of independence, and large-capacity purification systems are independence bred into hardware. A household filter or countertop purifier. Harmless and normal. A system that can produce hundreds or thousands of gallons a day changes the equation. It becomes a resource you can distribute, trade, or use to sustain a group, and that's exactly what agencies fear. The moment you show the capacity to provide clean water at scale, you move from being a private household to being quasi-infrastructure. And infrastructure is something that local, state, and national authorities prefer to own, regulate, or at least control. Suppliers of industrial filters, reverse osmosis rigs, and UV sterilization equipment commonly require professional installation, permitting, and sometimes registration. Those permits generate paper trails that attract attention long before any emergency. In tense times, municipal authorities can declare water purification assets critical and either commandeer them or restrict access under emergency powers. Official language frames this as fairness, equity, or public health, that commandeering prevents hoarding and ensures equitable distribution. But the functional effect is to centralize access to the thing that literally keeps people alive. If you're producing thousands of gallons off-grid, you're not the kind of dependent citizen the state prefers. You're a node of resilience that complicates distribution plans and undermines leverage. Beyond seizure risk, owning industrial systems exposes you to inspection regimes, safety codes, and liability claims. If your multi-household supply is implicated in contamination, officials have reason to intervene. For preppers who want to be useful to their neighbors, large purification capacity is a moral good. For the power structure, it's an asset they'd rather control. So expect scrutiny, permits, paperwork, and the occasional legal pretext to step in and fold your waterworks into whatever centralized system is being rolled out in an emergency. 6. Body armor and tactical loadouts, defense. They call aggression. Defensive gear gets marketed as safety and protection, but public institutions frame it as a threat. The minute you buy cert-rated body armor or full tactical kits, your consumer profile shifts from prepared citizen to person of interest. Vendors, especially those selling plate carriers, ballistic plates, and military-style chest rigs, often record purchases and pass records or suspicious order reports up the chain. Authorities track these patterns because body armor combined with other indicators, weapons purchases, ammunition, or tactical training, creates the image of an organized, potentially armed group. That's the point. Wearing armor doesn't make you an attacker, but bureaucracies prefer to treat it as if it does. Narrative framing is everything. The messaging from official sources almost always pairs armor with aggression. If you have plates, you must be preparing to shoot. That conflation lets law enforcement justify heightened surveillance and correlates your protective choices with criminal intent. In a crisis, the stakes go practical and personal. If a community member is seen in tactical gear, responders may treat them as a threat rather than a volunteer, reducing the chance of peaceful coordination. On the enforcement side, keeping armor ownership visible and traceable creates a lever to identify and monitor network. Combine body armor with firearms and ammunition purchases, and you've got a composite profile that triggers deeper probes. There are legal distinctions in many places. Some jurisdictions restrict armor sales or require records, others don't. But the social and administrative reaction is similar. Armor equals escalation. Preppers see armor as a pragmatic layer of personal safety. The system sees it as potential paramilitary capacity. That perception drives reporting, auditing, and sometimes the outright criminalization of combined tactical setup. So if you choose to kit up, understand that you're not just buying protection. You're stepping into a category that invites scrutiny, labeling, and the kinds of interventions the state reserves for perceived threats. 7. Ammunition and reloading supplies. Closing the loop. They fear bulk ammunition and the tools to make more are the exact kinds of independence that set off alarm bells. Buying big boxes of rounds, primers, or powder is no longer a private purchase in a vacuum. It leaves a digital footprint. Banks, credit card processors, and the algorithms that police suspicious activity notice patterns, repeated or high-volume purchases, unusual vendor chains, or clustered buys across multiple accounts. That data gets flagged, aggregated, and fed into systems designed to detect potential stockpiling for malicious ends. Whether the purchaser's intent is defense, sport, or survival doesn't change the algorithm's result. You become a person of interest. Reloading is the real kicker. It closes supply loops. When you learn to transform components into usable rounds, you stop depending on retail restocks or commercial channels that can be shut down, taxed, or limited. That capability, self-sustaining ammunition production, undermines a tool state's find useful scarcity. Controlling the flow of ammunition is a quick way to control violence, movement, and the balance of power in crisis scenarios. So reloading supplies are more than just items. They are the infrastructure of sustained resistance or long-term survival. Authorities know this. Expect regulatory pressure, reporting requirements, or targeted restrictions to follow wherever reloading becomes widespread enough to be visible. There's also the social and legal framing. Ammunition buys are often paired with other risk indicators, training, tactical gear, firearms purchases, and that composite profile invites searches, audits, and forfeiture actions in certain jurisdictions. Politically and administratively, it's easy to justify curtailing reloading through the language of public safety, but the practical effect is the same. Make it harder to be self-sufficient. If you're stacking primers and powder, understand two things plainly. First, those boxes are logged. Second, that log can be used to limit your future access or justify intervention. For a prepper, that is the trade-off. Immediate capability versus becoming visible and therefore manageable. The system prefers consumers who must ask permission to continue functioning. Reloading closes that permission gap, and that's why it's on the blacklist. 8. Personal aerial surveillance. Eyes from above. They want grounded. Drones and surveillance gear flip perspective. They let civilians see what used to be exclusively state view. That aerial vantage is power, real-time situational awareness that can expose failing official narratives, verify conditions on the ground, and guide rapid responses without waiting for bureaucratic release of information. Because of that, regulators have bent over backward to fold drones into traceable, controllable frameworks. Flight logs, remote identification, no-fly zones. The technical language is framed around safety, but functionally it creates visibility into who is flying where, when, and with what capability. During routine times, that visibility looks mundane. Compliance ticks in a box. In a crisis, it becomes a lever. Authorities can order grounding, mandate registration checks, or seize equipment. If a drone is operating independent of official channels during an emergency, expect enforcement to treat it as interference or a threat to controlled airspace. The consequence is simple. Aerial surveillance that isn't filtered through sanctioned agencies is classified as risky and is actionable. Vendors and platforms further complicate this by requiring IDs, logging purchases, and sometimes throttling firmware updates by serial number. Another source of traceability. The worry for authorities isn't just prying eyes, it's operational redundancy. Civilian drones can guide medical drops, map evacuation routes, or monitor crowd movements in ways that bypass command chains. That resiliency is the last thing an agency wants to see. So, the toolbox against independent UAV operations is predictable. Rules that require identification, systems that mandate centralized control, and emergency powers to ground or confiscate. If you value airborne situational awareness, recognize that you're entering a space that governments treat as theirs. Your quadcopter and camera aren't neutral toys, they're potential evidence of organized monitoring, and that makes them targetable in times when control of information matters most. 9. Large-scale seed stocks and farming gear. Harvesting freedom they don't want. Food is leverage. When you hold the means to grow and process food at scale, thick seed reserves, tractors, tillers, commercial planters, you aren't just a gardener. You are an alternative supply chain. That's threatening to centralized planners. Large seed orders and heavy farming purchases broadcast capacity. You can feed a household, a block, or potentially a community without relying on supermarket trucks or government distribution. In a shortage, that capacity undermines rationing systems and the influence those systems buy with promised aid. Authorities respond in two predictable ways. First, they fold these assets into legal categories that increase oversight, permits, certifications, or zoning restrictions that convert personal resilience into regulated activity. Second, in declared emergencies, they invoke emergency powers or public interest clauses to seize or redirect agricultural inputs. Framed as equitable distribution or disease control, commandeering seeds or farm supplies is easy to justify on paper. The practical effect is to strip local actors of the very tools that would let them opt out of dependence. There's also a social dimension. Large seed and equipment purchases create visible networks. Suppliers log transactions, shipping manifests, and equipment registrations create trails. Those trails can reveal cooperative efforts, who's building community gardens, who's organizing local food hubs, which then become points of administrative pressure. For preppers, that means if you're building a real scalable food resilience plan, keep in mind that visibility increases the chance of interference. Grow in ways that help neighbors. Yes, just don't be naive about what large-scale agricultural capacity looks like to authorities whose primary goal is to maintain control over distribution channels during crises. 10. Physical wealth. Gold, silver, and the old rules they still use. Precious metals are classic hedge tools, and for good reason. They hold value outside fiat systems, but history shows governments can and will exert power over private hoards when they choose. The example everyone points to, gold seizures in the 20th century, wasn't a fluke of history. It's a legal and political precedent that still informs how states view unregulated stores of wealth. Large transactions at dealers trigger anti-money laundering filters today, and those reports are another layer of trace data that can be used to map who holds physical wealth and in what quantities. In a crisis, metals can become contraband fat. Authorities can characterize large holdings as destabilizing, hoarding, or even illegal under emergency monetary controls. The mechanisms available are blunt: emergency proclamations, temporary freezes, or requisition orders, couched in the language of national security. Dealers who used to quietly handle sizable trades are now required to file suspicious activity reports, collect IDs, and report totals, so the very act of converting cash into metal creates a paper trail that can be exploited later. Holding precious metals isn't inherently nefarious, but it is conspicuous when large enough to matter. That conspicuity brings regulatory friction, surveillance, and the real possibility of enforced conversion back into state-controlled instrument. For anyone who thinks gold and silver are a private escape hatch, the blunt reality is that visibility invites intervention. The system prefers assets it can tax, regulate, or free. Physical bullion is portable and durable, but that makes it both useful to the individual and dangerous in the eyes of authorities who value predictable, controllable financial flows. If you're stacking metal, do so knowing you're holding a long-standing form of independence, and that independence has historically been, and remains, something governments know how to neutralize. 4. The pattern they're watching. How single items become a threat vector. Don't kid yourself, no authority is rattled by one odd purchase. What makes the alarm bells go off is pattern, correlation, and scale. A single night vision monocular, a lone 5-gallon fuel can, a household first aid kit. None of that gets you flagged. But when those disparate purchases start to line up, that's where the system puts you on the map. Algorithms and human analysts don't hunt for intent. They hunt for signatures, repeated buys, overlapping categories, overlapping delivery addresses, clustered timestamps. Those bits of data knit together into a profile that screams capacity to operate independently. That profile is the commodity authorities want because it's useful. It tells them who can move, who can see in the dark, who can talk in private, who can feed a neighborhood, and who can keep themselves and others healthy without asking for permission. In short, it tells them who could circumvent centralized control when the chips are down. This is how prepping openly becomes a liability. When you loudly document your purchases, post logistics diagrams, list equipment, or create visible supply chains, you're not keeping a personal inventory. You're building a dossier. Suppliers, payment processors, delivery services, and permit offices all generate records that are stitched together by pattern-matching systems. Those systems don't care whether you're building a community pantry or setting up a private militia. They care about nodes of capability. And capability is power in the eyes of the state. The more capabilities you concentrate, and the more clearly they point to resilience, the more likely those capabilities will be regulated, commandeered, or simply investigated. Understand the incentives here. Central authorities derive power from dependency. If they can ensure populations rely on centralized distribution, controlled communications, and officially sanctioned services, they keep leverage. Independent nodes, people who can produce water, power, information, movement, or medical care, disrupt that leverage. So the reaction is predictable. Surveillance, paperwork, restrictions, and legal pretexts to reassert control. That doesn't mean every prepper will be targeted, but it does mean visibility increases risk. It's not conspiracy theory, it's how administrative systems work. They don't need to accuse you of wrongdoing to neutralize your independence. They can reclassify assets, require permits, or fold resources into emergency programs. If you choose to prepare publicly, just accept the trade-off. Communal benefit and transparency come with scrutiny and regulatory friction. If you operate at scale, expect to be treated like quasi-infrastructure. That might be fine if your goal is community leadership, but it's a reality you should factor into planning. The bottom line is blunt and simple. Vulnerabilities to control come less from individual items than from the pattern they form. Stack capabilities and you'll stack attention. 5. Legitimate security versus illicit evasion. what I won't help with and what you can do instead. Straight talk first. I will not provide instructions that would help someone hide activities or evade lawful oversight. Advice that meaningfully facilitates avoiding law enforcement, registration, traceability, or legal accountability is off limits. Telling someone how to buy gear anonymously, bypass reporting, falsify records, or otherwise obscure ownership is the line I will not cross. Why? Because helping someone evade lawful oversight can actively enable harm. It's not advice, it's a vector. If your goal is to skirt laws or dodge legitimate public safety controls, I can't help with that. That said, there's a large, lawful middle ground between being a walking billboard for your supplies and taking steps that would be illicit. You can be prudent, protective of your privacy, and operationally secure in ways that are entirely legal and socially responsible. The core distinction is intent and action. Legitimate privacy and risk mitigation strengthen resilience without actively obstructing lawful processes. Think of it this way. Sensible security minimizes accidental exposure and reduces petty theft, while illegal evasion seeks to permanently obscure accountability. I'll help you with the former, not the latter. So, here's blunt, lawful guidance on responsible OPSEC and resilience that doesn't cross the line. First, treat inventory and planning as private documents. Keep lists offline. Limit distribution to trusted, vetted people, and use written agreements when sharing supplies with neighbors or groups. Second, physical security matters. Secure storage, anchored lockers, appropriate locks, and fire-safe containers reduce theft risk and accidental discovery. They're about protecting assets, not hiding them. Third, comply with laws and permits. If an installation requires inspection or permission, get it. Paperwork is annoying, but compliance reduces friction later and prevents headlines that can bring unwanted scrutiny. Fourth, practice digital hygiene. Use strong, unique passwords, enable two-factor authentication, and avoid broadcasting detailed inventories or maps on public forums. Those are standard privacy practices, not evasion techniques. Fifth, document provenance and legality for high-value items. Receipts, certifications, and warranties protect you legally and help resolve disputes. Finally, build community legitimacy, work with neighbors, local volunteer organizations, and emergency response groups. Being seen as a contributor to communal resilience reduces the chance that authorities will treat your capacity as a rogue asset.